I did it! I did the Fates games.
Whew, man, never going through that again. Well, we're back, ladies and gentlemen, with more proper Fire Emblem games as opposed to the crossover spin-off that's either loved or hated. Awakening was a huge hit back in 2013, gathering a large crowd of new players to the series in what was supposed to be the last game unless sales were good enough, and it more than exceeded expectations. So where do we go from here after successfully saving the Fire Emblem series from permadeath with just one game? The answer's simple. You make 3 of them at the same time.
Nintendo saw the money flowing from Awakening and gave the go-ahead to another new Fire Emblem project for Intelligent Systems to work on, with the main staff of Awakening returning for Fates, including Koei Maeda and Genki Yokota as directors. Although Yokota was also busy with Xenoblade Chronicles X back then, so I don't know how much he was involved this time. Naturally, the idea of making another Fire Emblem after saving the series from disappearing off the face of the earth came as a big surprise to them all, but accepted it and got cracking with Fates. It was originally called Fire Emblem If, which was the Japanese subtitle to represent the different choices players had throughout the story, and how they were going to shape the main character, Corrin, but I think Fates is a bit more direct and suits it better, honestly. Simply doing another Awakening wasn't going to be enough, however. IS wanted to up the ante by turning Fire Emblem Fates into 3 separate games. Trailers and advertisements marketed Fates as a choose-your-own-path type of adventure, where Corrin was actually kidnapped at a young age by their adoptive father, and is caught in a dilemma between joining the family that's raised them their whole life, or going with Corrin's blood relatives that they finally meet after so many years apart. Fire Emblem Fates Birthright has you stick with Corrin's real family in Hoshido and go against the ones that they grew up with, while Fates Conquest puts you with the people that Corrin also considers family in Nor, but still bouts with their genetic brothers and sisters. The third option, Fates Revelation, is DLC exclusive and has Corrin decide not to go with anyone, with both families considering Corrin a traitor, and then they're left to wonder how they can persuade everyone to get along. Owning either Birthright or Conquest will offer you Revelation at a discounted price, but unfortunately there's no other way to get Revelation aside from purchasing it as DLC, which at this day and age is a big problem because by March 2023, the 3DS eShop will be permanently shut down, so if you do plan on getting Revelation at some point, you'll need to be very quick about it. I haven't been in the 3DS emulation scene in quite a long time, so I don't know if they've gotten any better recently, but once the stores are closed, that'll be your only method of playing Revelation unless there's a download code on eBay that's now guaranteed to be expensive as hell. That still wasn't enough for Intelligent Systems though, because they also wanted to give each of the games different levels of challenge based on your experience with Fire Emblem. Birthright was designed for newcomers to the series or have at least played Awakening beforehand, giving players more opportunities to grind for XP and money with skirmishes, while generally being the least stressful of the Fates titles. Conquest was intended to be touched by Fire Emblem veterans who want to be tested to their limits, and don't have the option to do skirmishes whatsoever, so money and experience is a lot more limited, while enemies hit you really damn hard and the map design is much more tricky to deal with. Revelation was supposed to reach some sort of middle ground, nothing too easy but nothing too hard either, and still give you time to beef up your characters and wallet. On paper, this sounds like a pretty cool idea, and I was certainly on board with it, especially after finishing Awakening for the first time a few months prior to Fates' release in 2016, and with Corrin appearing as a DLC fighter in Smash Bros. 4 not long before getting our hands on the games, but the way Nintendo and Intelligent Systems handled it provided some issues. See, the actual turning point in the story where Corrin has to pick a side doesn't happen until the start of Chapter 6, but that's okay, it means we can spend a bit of time learning about the two families so that choosing a path will be easier. To go into some early spoilers, however, one of the big problems is that Fates makes it really easy to pick the Hoshiden family, since King Garen, Corrin's Norian father, kidnapped them to begin with and also killed both of their real parents in cold blood, hoping that Corrin was going to follow suit after basically sending them out on a suicide mission before the big decision. Sure, the Norian siblings are nice enough to Corrin and all, but why would we want to stick around with this psychopath who murders people for no reason? Not to mention, the Hoshiden family are portrayed in bright colors quarters where the sun's always shining, while the Norian family's given much darker attire and live in a dank gloomy castle that I would like to further add that Corrin is strictly forbidden to leave without permission. Yeah, screw you all, I'm going with my actual family, but here lies the other problem with Fates' setup. Say that I owned a copy of Conquest, but I wanted to pick the Hoshiden side because I didn't like the look of the Norian side. Well, here's the thing, Sonny, the game you buy also determines which path you take, and you're stuck with it unless you buy the other game. This means you already had to have prior knowledge as to what Fates was all about, but even in the trailers you aren't given much context about what the families are like as individuals. What makes me want to side with the Hoshiden family when I've got the Norian family as an option too? Should I side with the people who raised me or the ones that had the same genetic code as me? I don't know, and I won't find out until I've already bought one of these games. Luckily for me, I decided to go with Birthright first anyway, since back in 2016 I was still very much new to Fire Emblem. But if I was a seasoned player going through Conquest and I didn't like where the story was going, I would have been shit out of luck, especially if I couldn't afford the other games. This was the major disadvantage with separating the narrative into 3 titles, and it's not like Pokemon where the plot's the same but the different versions offer exclusive Pokemon. There are entirely separate storylines in each Fates game, encouraging you to try out all of them. Fates Birthright took me a little over 30 hours to finish too, which is not a short game by any means. A bit meatier than Awakening too, and my god did it drag sometimes, but we'll get there in a bit. Conquest trimmed a lot of the fat because of the exclusion of skirmishes, so as a result it didn't take me as long to complete, roughly around 16 hours, and Revelation ended up taking me 19 hours to reach the credits. That's all excluding deaths though, but even so, that's a total of 65 hours I invested in these games just to see everything Fates has to show for it. And there's once again paid DLC maps to play through as well if you still want more, like the Return of the Awakening crew that you can get for free. I know that I only have myself to blame for all of this, but with each title being very much different to each other, I can't get away with simply reviewing one of the games and calling it a day. I gotta look at Fates in its entirety. But god damn, this was way too much Fire Emblem for me. And after going through all of Fates, I considered stopping this marathon there and then because I got so exhausted. That's luckily not the case, however, as I eventually recorded all of Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia, which we'll be looking at next time, as well as Fire Emblem Warriors, and as of right now, one of the paths for 3 houses that I can already say does Fates' concept much better.
I'm getting well ahead of myself anyway, and I should talk about the stories for each Fates title first. I'm gonna try and keep these summaries as brief as I can, because we got 3 of the bastards to go through this time, and I apologize if I put any of you to sleep.
So once again, before the game starts, we need to build our avatar and name it whatever we want, with the canonical name being Corrin as I mentioned earlier. I'm gonna be less boring though than I was in building Robin from Awakening. I'll instead recreate what I remember making Corrin look like on my very first playthrough of Fates. A female with long green hair, flowery headband, and a cool eye patch because I guess I just like eye patches on certain characters. I'm still calling her Corrin, however, I'm not that adventurous yet. You can also now choose a Boon and Bane for your avatar, which basically increases and decreases the chance of particular stats going up upon each level, as well as a talent that's just your starting class for Corrin, but annoyingly the game doesn't tell you what Boon, Bane, and Talent actually does, or what the benefits are for each one, so you may need to look up online for clarification. Corrin has a terrible dream about soldiers of Hoshido and Nor fighting each other because they all claim to want their sibling back. Corrin then gets awoken early in the morning to do some combat training with their brother Prince Xander of Nor, while their other brother Leo observes. After beating Xander in a mock battle, we're also introduced to Corrin's sisters Elise and an abnormally giant pair of water balloons with a face attached called Camilla. Every one of Corrin's siblings love them dearly, but Corrin is not actually allowed to leave the fortress for reasons unknown, and conveniently they've also lost part of their memory at an early age, spending many years training to win the approval to go outside by their father, King Garen, and it looks like they may finally get that chance. Garen gives Corrin a sword to take with them into battles against their rivals in Hoshido, wanting them to test it out on the latest prisoners brought in, Rinka and Kaze, with Kaze being somewhat familiar with Corrin. The two of them get weakened in battle, but Garen doesn't want to show any mercy and orders Corrin to kill them both, which they see no point in doing, angering their father and king. Leo thankfully makes it look like he slaughtered them in front of Garen to make up for Corrin's soft-heartedness, but in reality it's only a spell that's the equivalent of a slap. Attempting to apologize for their actions, Corrin's given a test mission to prove their worth by inspecting an abandoned Hoshidan fort. Garen does give her some sort of backup in the form of Hans though, an ex-criminal that Xander locked away many years ago, and Garen believes to have turned over a new leaf. We have no idea why he was arrested, how long he's been in prison, or why Garen wants to entrust him with his precious daughter. I can see this going so very well. We're also joined by Corrin's retainer Gunter, as well as their loyal butler that serves a spot of tea with a side of ass-whooping, Jacob. There seems to be Hoshidans inside the fortress requesting that we turn around, which Corrin believes they should all do, but Hans charges in and kills one of the soldiers, prompting an attack. You mean to tell me the ex-criminal was actually a bad guy all along? Color me surprised, I'm just shocked, I tell you. Once the rest of the soldiers are dealt with, Corrin and Gunter try to escape, but Hans is there waiting for them, knocking Gunter off the bridge, telling Corrin that this was all from the orders of Garen himself, with Corrin transforming their arm in a fit of rage. Before anything can happen though, Corrin's sword that Garen gave them starts having a mind of its own and flings them off the bridge too, but gets saved by one of their maids, Lilith, before plummeting to the ground. Lilith, as it turns out, is a dragon that Corrin nurtured when she was just a baby and had nowhere to go, believing Lilith was a strange type of bird. Which yeah, how do you confuse the two exactly? She remained in human form anyway and began serving Corrin to return the favor. Lilith manages to transport her and Corrin in the nick of time using what's known as a dragon vein, this pool of goo that normally changes the map within gameplay that can only be used by those with draconic blood, including Corrin and their family in Nor and Hoshido. Lilith has taken herself and Corrin to the astral realm, but has to put Corrin back where she originally was before she fell to handle some unfinished business. She does just that, but Corrin ends up getting knocked out by someone, only to reveal that it was actually Rinka, where she and Kaze take Corrin to Lord Ryoma, High Prince of Hoshido, in silly-looking headdresses. This is where Corrin is then met by their real mother, Queen Makoto, telling them that the siblings they've been growing up with are not related by blood, and that they were kidnapped by Garen. Ryoma and his two sisters, Hinoka and Sakura, as well as his dick cheese of a brother, Takumi, are Corrin's biological family who haven't seen them in years. Garen had convinced Corrin's true father, Sumeragi, to meet up and negotiate some sort of peace treaty between Nor and Hoshido, but that was all one big lie to lure Sumeragi to his death, and then take Corrin as Garen's own child. Makoto has also put up a barrier around the kingdom to ensure that Nor can't invade Hoshido by making them feel bad about fighting whenever someone enters. Boy, that's a lame effect it has on them. But that's why Nor instead sends over monsters called the Faceless with no soul or emotions to speak of. As Corrin wanders around to clear their head from all the shock, we're then introduced to yet another character, Azura, a former Norian princess that got kidnapped herself by Hoshidans, but they accepted Azura as one of their own and gave her a happy life. Already a ceremony gets set up with tons of people showing to meet the long-lost child of Makoto. Like, this had to have been done in just a few hours. There's no way you could put something together this fast. Corrin is nevertheless welcomed with open arms by both her family and the local villagers, except for Takumi anyway, who doesn't trust Corrin in the slightest because he still believes they're still loyal to the Norians. Either that or he does his job way too well at being the royal asshat. A hooded figure suddenly appears though and uses the force to steal the sword gifted to Corrin, causing a great big explosion with it which destroys a large chunk of the town and claims the lives of many people, including Queen Makoto. Understandably, Corrin is now even more upset after losing their mother and fully transforms themselves into a dragon in uncontrollable anger. Azura thinks to calm them, however, by singing the song she was practicing earlier when they first met, which seems to work, and Corrin now remembers everything that happened to Sumeragi and Garen kidnapping them when they were a baby. Ryoma also reveals that he and the rest of the family carry dragon's blood too from the Dawn Dragon, while the Norian family have the blood of the Dust Dragon. You get it? The Norians fall to darkness while the Hoshidans rise to light? Symbolism! And yet another reason to side with the Hoshidans and not the Norians. King Garen had planned everything from the start by giving Corrin that sword, sending them and innocent Hoshidan lives to their deaths, but Makoto luckily foresaw this happening and buried the divine sword Yato that chooses Corrin as its wielder. Azura also creates a dragon stone to help Corrin keep control of their dragon abilities and turn back into a human whenever, just to keep things convenient for gameplay. Right on time too, because Norian forces are approaching the town for an attack, now that Makoto is dead and the barrier is broken, with Corrin's other family being there too, asking them to reunite and go against the Hoshidans. This is where the major decision comes in between siding with the Hoshidans, the Norians, or neither, and we'll go through each of the paths one by one. I'll start with Birthright, where Corrin chooses to stick with the Hoshidans, with the Norians believing that Corrin's been brainwashed. They engage in battle for a bit before the Norians have to retreat, and now the goal is to relieve Garen from his throne and restore peace to the land, helping anybody in dire need along the way. Takumi ends up brainwashed himself, attacking his own allies, but Azura snaps him out of it by singing to him the same song she did with Korin. Ryoma goes missing for a long while after the breakup with the Norian family, but we eventually find him and never let him leave my army because he's so ridiculously powerful and can also attack within 2 spaces. The further we go in our travels, the more of the Norian family we come across, who all have a bone to pick with Korin and the Hoshidans. Garen's right-hand man, Iago, unleashes a couple of surprise attacks and is oddly more of an entertaining villain than Garen is with his sarcastic skepticism. After a scuffle with some of the possessed Wolfskin tribe, Kaze will either live or die depending on whether or not he has A-rank support with Korin. In the Ice Tribe village, one of the other Norian maids, Flora, that's been looking after Korin, turns her back on everybody because Garen threatened to burn her village to the ground if she didn't cooperate. But once we talk to her after disposing of her backup, she realizes that this was all wrong and casts herself on fire so that Garen doesn't get what he wants, and thus has no reason to destroy her village. Once we defeat Leo, Azura gives him a crystal that shows him what the war's been doing to everyone, and in exchange he transports everyone to where the Rainbow Sage is to bless the Yato and make it powerful enough to defeat Garen. Then we soon find out that every time Azura sings her song to fix whatever's wrong, she endures a great deal of pain, and using it for too long, especially on a larger target like Garen, could end up killing her. We encounter Elise and Camilla one last time before finally convincing them that we want to stop this war in a peaceful manner, and Hans makes another appearance trying to kill Korin, but strikes Lilith instead, who returns to her human form during her last few breaths to say thanks to Korin. Takumi turns out to have not been totally cured from possession as explained by the returning Iago, and that he's been leading the Norians to their locations all along. But we defeat Iago once and for all, with Leo ending his life after trying to beg his way out, breaking Takumi free from the curse. Leo still doesn't join our side though because he's too loyal to the Norians, even if he now knows about Garen's evil atrocities. The only sibling left to persuade is Xander, but he's too far gone and continues to fight Korin, with Elise stepping in front of Xander's final blow to Korin, killing her off instead before wishing for the 2 siblings to stop fighting. So the 2 of them keep fighting, and I don't understand why this had to happen. Xander claims that it was his sworn duty or whatever, and fate never gave him a choice in the matter, to the point that he actually let Korin win during their duel, but that's such a weak reason to have to fight him if you ask me. He's a prince, of course he has a choice. Sure, Garen might order some of his troops to go after Xander for his betrayal, but the Hoshidans have already come this far and even got Elise and Camilla on their sides. He's got his retainers accompanying him as well, bring them along to help. They seem pretty loyal to Xander, so why doesn't he want to join us? Because of some bullshit fate that never got established beforehand? I don't buy that at all, and the fact that he also doesn't want to follow the wishes of his dead sister that he killed seems just as nonsensical. I suppose by that point Xander was feeling too guilty about everything that's happened, and that's also why he let Korin win, not wanting to live with the shame, but again he could try and make up for that by assisting us. It may not bring Elise back, but he'd be discarding his old tactics and starting new ones to learn what's right after seeing someone so close to him lose their life by this war. Anyway, slight tangent over. All that's left to do is confront Garen and kill him. But the Blessed Yato does nothing to him until it starts resonating with Ryoma's weapon and becomes the Blazing Yato for the Game Boy Advance, where we can finally strike Garen and finish him off. Of course though, being Fire Emblem, we have to fight a dragon at the end, which Garen transforms himself into, breaking the Blazing Yato and knocking out Korin. They then dream about all of the loved ones they lost, telling them to wake up and carry on battling Garen, along with all of the other friends that they made along their journey, similar to the end of Awakening. Through the power of convenient fantasy rules, the love of Xander, Elise, and all those who had faith in Korin restore the Blazing Yato that now cannot be destroyed. Azura uses this opportunity to sing her heart out to stop Garen in his tracks while everyone else makes their way over to him. And after a grueling confrontation, Garen is at last killed, but Azura seems to have overdone it and begins to fade away, never to be seen again. Now that there's peace between Hoshido and Nor, Ryoma is crowned king as they hold a ceremony for the occasion, which even Leo and Camilla show up for. Everyone's having a good time during the post-coronation festival, but Korin gets a little tired out, noticing Azura nearby singing the same song she's been doing since the start of the game. She's gotta be tired of that at some point. But Azura disappears as she thanks Korin for all they've done anyway, possibly indicating that this was just an illusion, or the spirit of Azura was just there with them. Jesus Christ, okay, that's Birthright done and dusted. Let's move on to Conquest. In this storyline, instead of siding with the Hoshidans, Corrin decides to stick with her Norian family to get more answers about Garen's motives, but Ryoma and the others still see them as a traitor for going against them. Ryoma especially is pretty damn quick to change from welcoming Corrin into his life to "Die bitch die, I will paint the grass red with your blood!" Like, where the hell did that come from? You are not the same person I came to know in Birthright. He's even more aggressive than Xander was when I sided with Hoshido. Garen is heavily displeased that Corrin's still alive and calls upon the mystical dragon and Nenkos as to what should be done. Corrin is to once again be put to a test regarding their loyalty to Nor by giving them a number of tasks, which usually involve slaughtering rebels and villagers, with the results somehow a lot of the time ending in the soldiers being merely injured and not dead, while Iago becomes more and more suspicious of Corrin each time and whether they're on their side. Late in the game, this all leads to a conversation between Corrin and Xander talking about what really is justice in an honestly pretty poor attempt to sound deep and complex. Because we're talking about murdering innocent lives here. When Garen sends Corrin to their first task, for some reason, right in front of Xander and the others, he talks about how he intends to make Corrin suffer. And Xander himself even comments on this, knowing that it's wrong, but he still blindly goes along with what Garen says. I know that Garen's an all-powerful force of evil that's likely too strong for everyone to take on, but they also let a lot of people die in this game, unintentionally or otherwise, to ensure that Corrin stays on Garen's good side, as well as to save their own skins, and I can't help but wonder how long they're able to keep this going. First, the Rainbow Sage commits suicide after finding him and upgrading the Yato again after Corrin was tasked of ending his life by their own hands. Then Hans and his troops brutally kill some wounded opposing soldiers and even villagers because they're apparently warriors who haven't picked up weapons yet. And then that happens again after defeating Sakura in one chapter with Garen joining in too. That's just to name a few scenarios, and more cracks in the plan keep appearing to temporarily satisfy Garen until the next chapter. And this goes on for most of Conquest's story, which quickly gets a bit repetitive. Other than that, you just run into your Hoshidan siblings one by one and have a bout with them for a bit. We go to an opera, but Azura, this mysterious dancer tries to place a curse on Garen with the best goddamn song in the game. It's the same one that Azura already sings, but with a lot more energy put into it and some Bollywood-esque choreography that's just great. Like, here's the version she sings in Birthright. Yeah, that's pretty and all, but have a listen to the Conquest version now.
Yeah, man, this is more like it.
But the curse doesn't fully succeed in the end, and then Corrin's Yato reacts with Leo's divine weapon to forge the Grim Yato. Afterwards, Corrin follows Azura to a nearby lake, but accidentally arrives in a whole new world, where Gunter appears to be okay as well. And Azura uses a crystal from the other world to show Corrin a gooey water demon that's taken over Garen's body. This unearthly realm we found, never seen again, because Azura explains that they can't talk about it outside of this world, or else they'll vanish. Even though immediately after they come out, they're talking about it, and it doesn't have a name as far as this game's concerned, so what determines them as speaking too much about it? Not only that, but in order to reveal Garen's true form, he has to be sitting on the Hoshidan throne, which Corrin and Azura believe is the only way to prove it to the others.
So in order to show everyone outside of the other world that Garen's not who he is anymore, he has to have already conquered Hoshido and be sitting on the throne? Isn't that the very thing we're trying to prevent in the first place? Seems like we're helping Garen more than anything.
Iago then starts summoning more Faceless as our heroes continue their journey, and yet again Lilith steps in to shield Corrin from death. Man, poor Lilith can't survive either path. Maybe Revelation will be nicer to her. Yeah, I guess that was kind of funny. Next up is dealing with Takumi, who we've encountered a few times before, and becomes more and more fixated on killing Corrin and letting out his utter hatred for Nor. But in one of these interactions, Azura mentions that even though Takumi could be rude, he could also be kind. This latest meeting with him elaborates on that further by revealing a strange aura around him that suggests something has taken control of him as well. He disappears for now after defeating him once more in battle, and then we fight Hinoka and her army, sparing them but still taking Hinoka's Naginata as proof to give Garen the illusion that Corrin killed her. Ryoma's all that's left to take care of for the Hoshidan siblings, but he's under the impression that Sakura is a prisoner and Hinoka has kicked the bucket, since once more Corrin has to pretend in front of Iago and Garen that they killed her. This extremely angers Ryoma as he vows to end Corrin's life himself and demands a duel to the death. Corrin naturally ends up winning, finally being able to tell him that Hinoka is still alive, but Garen orders Korin to dispose of Ryoma so that he can rule Hoshido. They again try to reason with him, but diplomacy continues to fail, which helps Ryoma put the pieces together, retaliating by killing himself with his own sword, marking yet another time Korin had to be bailed by someone else. Not that it lasts long anyway, because while Garen heads inside Hoshido's throne room, Iago's men have discovered Hinoka and her small army, instigating another skirmish, with Hans by his side too to try and finish off Korin, as well as their Norian siblings who help them out. Both Iago and Hans finally perish in battle, and we can now head inside the throne room with everyone to witness Garen's true form. Just like in Birthright, the Yato doesn't seem to work at first, but combined with the power of Leo's and Xander's divine weapons, turns it into the Shadow Yato that can be used to once again defeat Garen, which they succeed in doing after a long, grueling fight. The monster that's become Garen has at last been vanquished, while the soul of the more stern and fair Garen can finally rest in peace. But the game's still not over yet, because Takumi shows up more pissed off than ever, again breaking the Yato because it's made a goddamn silly putty, and Azura tells us that he's also being possessed by some unknown powerful force. Good god, is there anybody in these games that don't have their bodies taken over? Again, like in Birthright, Korin receives a near-fatal blow, but finds themselves in another dream with those that die throughout Conquest's story, telling them to get back up, with your other friends doing the same thing, yada yada yada. And suddenly, Takumi's in the dream too, the real one anyway. Turns out he died some time ago, but something still seems to be controlling his corpse, so with his last moments he gives Korin his divine bow. I'm not sure how that works if he's dead, and he apologizes for being such a jackass as Korin returns to everyone, now with the Yato fixed once more thanks to the power of Takumi's weapon. Hopefully that'll be the last time we have to go through this. Azura uses her singing powers again to weaken the fake Takumi, and after easily one of the most difficult chapters Conquest offers, Takumi's soul is finally freed and the puppet master is gone, not ever getting explained who it was unless you go through Revelation. The ending to Conquest is exactly the same as Birthright's, just that it's Xander's coronation as the King of Nor, with Hinoka and Sakura coming to see everybody instead. They have a nice royal banquet to celebrate the occasion, and Korin has possibly another illusion of Azura as she again thanks them, and the Norian family live happily ever after. Oh my god, okay, one more to go, we can do this. Fates Revelation story is centered around Korin choosing neither the Hoshidans or the Norians, but Ryoma and Xander still don't want to lose their sibling to their opposer, not listening to Korin as they try to find a more peaceful solution. Azura then has the brilliant idea of attacking both of their leaders to get their attention. Not surprisingly, this completely backfires and now both Ryoma and Xander spread the word about Korin being a traitor. The hell did you think was gonna happen? Korin, Azura, and Jacob retreat for now, and Azura takes them to the bottomless canyon where Gunter originally fell, asking them to follow her as they jump off the bridge, somehow not getting a single scratch on them as they fall, and they end up in the other world we discovered in Conquest, which Azura now explains is the Vala. This land is apparently owned by King Anenkos, the same dragon god that Garen's been worshipping in Birthright and Conquest. Before his arrival, the Vala was a peaceful place until Anenkos killed the last king and claimed the throne for himself, turning the entire kingdom and this world into a desolate wasteland. Though he still makes it look very pretty, I guess Anenkos is a fan of gardening. But more importantly, if Azura knew about all of this right from the very start, then why didn't she tell us about Anenkos in the Conquest storyline while we were in the Vala? That's a pretty big detail to simply forget, isn't it? I'm sure Conquest might not be considered canon to the Fire Emblem series, but there had to be some sort of hint that Anenkos was behind everything, aside from Takumi being possessed, shouldn't there? Conquest only told us that Azura couldn't talk about the Vala when she's back in the real world, but there's no rule saying she couldn't tell everyone about Anenkos. The other characters would probably question where she got that information from, but they had no problem dealing with that in Conquest when Garen wasn't himself, so what's the problem? Azura also explains that Anenkos is the one influencing Garen and that's why he's the cold heartless killer he is now, which again seems very vital to ending this war, so why has she been keeping this quiet until Revelation? But no, neither her or Korin can mention the Vala, otherwise their bodies will disappear once again, as that very thing happened to its former queen and Azura's mother, Aret. Yes, that would technically make Azura not a Norian princess, but instead a princess of the Vala, even though her title should be queen now that her mother's gone, and that Anenkos killed Azura's father, the king. As more enemies approach, we also see that Gunter's still alive after being transported to the Vala moments before he hit the ground, and everybody returns to the real world once the monsters are disposed of. From this point in the story, much like how a lot of Conquest involve Corrin trying to please Garen and earn his trust, a majority of Revelation's plot is just finding allies to help defeat Anenkos, including Corrin's siblings, while at the same time trying to tell them about Anenkos without spilling the beans about the Vala. Slowly but surely, you'll acquire all of the characters from both Birthright and Conquest to put into your army. Whew, thank God, that saves me some work with this summary. The Rainbow Sage makes an appearance one more time to increase the Yato's power to become the Alpha Yato, where he further explains that when combined with the power of the 4 other divine weapons that Ryoma, Takumi, Leo, and Xander already wield, can forge the Fire Emblem to defeat Anenkos. Beforehand, we run into Ryoma and Xander, and Corrin asks to meet them at the Bottomless Canyon to try and introduce them to the Vala. Unfortunately, just as they get there, Hans and Iago ambush them, but they and their forces are properly taken care of, very much downplaying their roles this time around, with Ryoma and Xander making it to the canyon after all. Earlier, Xander and Leo were ordered by Garen to destroy Hoshido, Nor, and the entire world so that he gained all the power, which ended up being a huge wake-up call that Garen's completely lost it and Corrin may have been right all along about him being under control by something else. With this, Ryoma and Xander finally set aside their differences and perform a truce, aiming to bring peace to both kingdoms and save the world. Corrin leads everyone to the Bottomless Canyon and gets them to jump towards the Vala, but Corrin then gets a surprise attack by a shadowy figure which the character Scarlet shields from it, and ends up dead as they make it to the other side. Yeah, I haven't really talked about Scarlet yet, have I? But in my defense, she doesn't make much of a first impression in the other Fates games. She's the leader of an anti-Nor resistance group that assists Corrin briefly in Birthright to take care of some Norians, and joins your army afterwards as a permanent ally. In Conquest, Scarlet only appeared once at the point where there was that big massacre by Hans and his men, and gets herself killed off screen in an apparently pretty gruesome manner, and that was it for her. So now she's suddenly given some character within Revelation's main story? Scarlet talks to Corrin about how it's custom for Chevian knights like her to put on a flower whenever they're approaching danger, making this the first time she's ever had a deep conversation with Corrin, and then she's immediately axed off with no way of saving her, not even by maxing out her supports like with Kaze. It gets even worse by chapter 23 where Anenkos reanimates her corpse, robbing her of her own free will and forces her to fight against her friends, only achieving inner peace after killing her in battle. That is such a tragic fate for her, but why is this only happening now in Revelation when Scarlet barely had anything to do in Birthright and Conquest? This is some of the stuff that I think would have improved Fates' story a little more, but having it entirely skip because you may not have bought Revelation is rather annoying. Everybody gets told of the Vala anyway, as well as Anenkos corrupting Garen and that Azura is a princess of this world. But before we get much further, we stumble upon a young boy named Anthony who finds himself in a bit of trouble. He claims to be one of Anenkos' slaves, which means he can lead the group right to him, and he does just that while we take care of some more possessed Valite troops. But when we reach through the back entrance alone with Anthony, he reveals that this was his plan all along and traps Corrin, though the others follow immediately after and jump in to help. Unhappy with the turnout, Anenkos transforms Anthony into a faceless and we end his suffering. The next obstacle we need to tackle is Arete returning from the dead, who of course is also brainwashed by Anenkos and isn't the same person she was before. But after defeating her a couple of times, she snaps back to her normal self just before she passes away, free from Anenkos' control. After that, Queen Makoto suddenly reappears, admitting to Corrin that she's another one of Anenkos' puppets, but still tries to help them get through the following level. Or so we think anyway, seeing how we saw hers and Arete's silhouettes earlier, and that Anthony already tricked us once before. The final door is revealed to be another trap. Makoto aims to kill everyone, but like with Arete, defeating her helps bring back the real Makoto to say her final goodbyes, while also dropping yet another bombshell on Corrin that they're actually part of Valite royalty, not Hoshido, meaning Arete is their aunt and Azura is their cousin. This is starting to sound like a cheesy soap opera now that I say it out loud. There's now only one servant of Anenkos left, and it's the hooded figure that killed Makoto at the beginning of the game, who turns out to be none other than Sumeragi, again fully possessed and wishing to fight his children, which they inevitably win, with Sumeragi being grateful for everything and that he got to see Corrin again one final time. Finally, and I mean finally, we can end these games by battling Anenkos, as we head into the throne room, but everyone apart from Corrin and Azura are struck by another trap. Gunter is very quick to come to the conclusion that Corrin and Azura are traitors, but Corrin remembers something Gunter said earlier regarding Scarlet and putting the flower on her chest, which only she and Corrin knew about at the time. In reality, it's Gunter who's the traitor, and yet again someone controlled by Anenkos because we didn't have enough of those already, this time believing that he is the King of Vala himself. There's another duel that takes place in the same chapter, and Corrin manages to bring the real Gunter back by talking to him and making him remember his true self so that he can continue helping us fight Anenkos. Speaking of which, we at last reach him, but for one final time the Yato doesn't work, the power of the divine weapons reacts with the Yato, forging the Fire Emblem, blah blah blah, we know the drill by now. Bing bang boom, Anenkos is beaten, but lo and behold, that was only his first phase, as he summons Garen to not necessarily have him assist in battle, despite Garen offering to become a vessel, but rather devour the Norian king and restore the power Anenkos originally gave to him. With the King of Vala reinvigorated, he returns to his true form, but at the end of this traditional endgame chapter where the final boss is a dragon, Anenkos is defeated for good and the Vala is once again a peaceful land. The Kingdom of Vala has also been rebuilt thanks to Ryoma and Xander offering land. Azura claims she isn't much of a born leader, so instead passes the crown to Corrin to become the new Valite king or queen. Hoshido and Nor form an official alliance with each other. Every one of Corrin's brothers and sisters get to be one big happy family, and Christmases and birthdays just got a whole lot more complicated. I should also note that the Hidden Truths DLC shows how Anenkos came to be the way he is in Revelation, including having a relationship with Makoto and Corrin as his child, making Anenkos Corrin's real father, and Sumeragi as their stepfather. I don't own the DLC myself, so I can't talk much more about it, but you should probably get it while you still can if you want a little more flavor in the story. Oh, okay, we made it. I cannot believe I spent this long talking about the stories, and after all that, I can conclude that they're all just fine, nothing outstanding, but serviceable enough. I've mentioned in previous videos throughout this marathon that I don't look at Fire Emblem stories too deeply and that they're basically just long road trips, but they usually make up for it by having interesting characters and support conversations. Honestly, I can't really feel the same way about Fates, because of the way it's structured. Splitting the story into 3 games may sound like that offers plenty of time to flesh out the characters, but surprisingly we don't learn that much about them. We get an idea of their personalities throughout the first 5 chapters, but once you make your big decision at chapter 6, that's it. They're just there to support Corrin and not a whole lot else. Support conversations help reduce this issue a little bit, but we only get very tiny details about them, like Corrin feeling too coddled by one of their Norian sisters, Camilla, or trying to win the trust of their Hoshidan brother, Takumi, because he's a grade A asshole. Yeah, let's talk about him for a minute. The whole idea with Takumi's character is that even though he's a loudmouth a lot of the time, he does so because he's worried for his family's safety. But there's a difference between being overprotective and just being a despicable prick. The words he uses on Corrin, not considering them a sibling, blaming them for their mother's death, the town being destroyed, and all of the bad things that happened throughout Birthright and Conquest, right after Corrin witnessed all of it, while calling them a filthy traitor, makes me want to say, you know what, fuck right off. You do not say that stuff to someone who just returned to their family by blood after so many years apart and lost the only thing they had to a mother. Read the room and be more respectable, you piece of shit. And by the time Takumi does finally acknowledge Corrin as their sibling, it's too little too late. What he says to Corrin is so harsh and so nasty that I already hate everything about him and don't care what happens to him. Like I said though, the other characters aren't spectacular either. And I know that in previous games, some of the side characters didn't get much attention in the main story either. However, the problem I have with the way Fates does it is that this is supposed to be about choosing who you consider your true family. And as Don Toretto will tell you, you don't turn your back on family. Hence why the games are split into 3, but ironically we don't get to know a great deal about each of the families. It's not that big of a deal when you gather more recruits throughout the story, but when a lot of the units you'll bring into battle are members of Corrin's family, I expected to get to know them as people and not be told they're family because they say they are. This isn't to say I dislike the characters at all, but I was hoping for a bit more than I was given. And Corrin is no Robin in terms of player avatar protagonist. The reason why I thought Robin worked in Awakening was because we got a grasp of who they were as people both within the main story and the support conversations. They were confident, resourceful, wisecracking, and reliable despite having amnesia. Corrin's big trait is that they're very kind and very trusting to others, sometimes to a fault, which they do bring up in the game, but that's also their strength in bringing people together, and that's about it. We learn more about Corrin's predicament than we do about Corrin as a person. What are their likes and dislikes aside from bringing peace and stopping evil? What are their goals once the war is over? How do they overcome their weaknesses? Just give us more than what we already have to make us truly understand Corrin. Yes, having to pick between your two families is a tough situation, but can I see what goes through Corrin's head? Like maybe they're suffering from anxiety and trauma from being taken away and having to fight the other family they don't pick. Or both in the case of Revelation. That's gotta be especially distressing. Show us Corrin's psyche and how they're coping with such a complicated issue. I feel like there's so much more that could have been done with this setup, but we only get a few memorable moments with underdeveloped characters that only a handful of them may stick in your head once you finish playing. I did enjoy Iago at times though as one of the main villains. He loves to mess around with people's heads but doesn't give a damn if the protagonist realizes he's just making it up. Almost in a condescending sort of way, like, yeah dumbass, of course I was tricking you. I kinda liked the Archduke as well for sparing us the flowery language Fire Emblem games usually have and being as informal as possible, but still maintaining a sense of class. It was nice to see at least one or two of the characters not taking things so seriously. I just wish I could say the same in regards to the stories themselves, since as I mentioned earlier, they're just your standard Fire Emblem narratives. They start off pretty interesting, but gradually become more of the same we've seen before, especially if you're playing the Fates games back to back. Birthright was probably the most generic of the stories because once the characters figure out that all of the evil in the world comes from Garen, you're just trying to make your way over to him and take his crown away. Conquest undoubtedly had the worst of the plots because it's the same scenario over and over again for like 80% of the game. Corrin's trying to win the trust of Garen and constantly finds loopholes so that they don't have to kill anyone, but that usually ends up in someone taking their own lives or someone in Garen's army doing it for Corrin. Revelation's story wasn't anything spectacular either, but while it does have a few inconsistencies after playing Birthright and Conquest, it feels the most complete out of the Fates trilogy. The only major downside is just how much could have been trimmed down if the family simply listened to Corrin much sooner, but they've got to hit that 28 chapter limit somehow, so pad it out.
I think what Fates tried to do with the stories and concept is very unique and interesting, but it didn't execute them in the best way in my opinion. If Intelligent Systems had more than 3 years after Awakening to write an entirely separate plot for 3 separate games, then maybe they could have ironed out some of the creases, but unfortunately that's not what we got, and what we do have, the stories feel a little rushed. And some of that could be said for the gameplay too.
A lot of what made Awakening's gameplay so good is here and accounted for in the Fates trilogy, and can be just as fun most of the time. They updated the pairing system so that it's not quite as broken as it was in Awakening, and in Fates you can even pair people up in the menu screen just before starting a new map. If two characters are standing next to each other as you engage in combat with an enemy, it'll work just like last time where the supporting character will provide a follow-up attack and do some extra damage, only now it's guaranteed every single time, as opposed to happening at random. And same as before, the higher your support with those characters, the higher the stat boost they get for that battle. However, if you stick a unit with another character so that they'll move together simultaneously, then the backup unit won't attack this time, but will instead block an oncoming enemy blow to the main unit once the shield icons on the battle screen are filled up after taking a few hits. As much as I love that sense of power you got from the pairing system in Awakening, I am kinda glad Fates made it more balanced and still useful enough to consider adding to your strategies. The only thing to keep in mind is that enemies and bosses have those same benefits that you do, and it can be a bit frustrating when you make it all the way to a tough boss, get their health down low and you're one hit away from killing them, but nope, their buddies block the next attack and possibly put your unit in grave danger. That can suck sometimes, but I'd overall say the pairing system is more fair than it was in Awakening if you thought it was maybe too good not to use there. A slightly odder change though is the complete removal of weapon durability except for staves. The weapons triangle is still here and even color-coded in these games, but you can now use any suitable weapon for as long as you want. Fancy abusing a killer weapon to greatly increase your critical rate with little consequences? Have at it, Fate says it's okay. But yeah, that does reduce the value of some weapons to a degree since you no longer have to think about whether or not you should use your better weapons now or save them for later. I see both pros and cons to this, and newcomers and veterans being split on the change altogether. But I would personally say it's not that bad since everything else is well designed enough. And 3 houses would later bring back weapon durability anyway, so the pain's only temporary if you really don't like its exclusion here. Fates also adds the new dragon veins to most of the levels that only those with draconic blood may use, indicated by a crown next to their name. This can affect the map in a number of ways, like freezing enemies in place for one turn, activating healing spaces, opening new pathways while blocking others, or perhaps my least favorite, the ones where you stop giant fans from blowing you away to another part of the stage. God damn it, I hated those levels. No matter which Fates game I was playing, it would take me 3 hours each to get through them. The worst parts of the Fates trilogy for me. Doubly so for the fact that they only act as tests of strength. The Dragon Veins are okay inclusions, but they don't add much to your strategy, at least in Birthright. Conquest makes a lot more use of them with the way the maps are designed and the enemies are placed, almost acting like puzzles to clearing the stages. Revelation gives them slightly more significance than in Birthright, but not as much as Conquest. The levels instead each have their own gimmicks, like plowing through snow where you can't see enemies, choosing teleporters that take you to different parts of the map, elevators that move every turn, or enemies landing in blue spaces to turn into their base classes, while trying to avoid having them in the red spaces so that they're not in their advanced classes. Out of the 3 games, I would say Revelation is probably the best with not only a more conclusive story, but also some of the better map designs Fates has to offer. You still need to do one with the giant fan sadly, and having every map contain a new gimmick might sound tiring after a while, and sometimes it can be, but I believe it gives Revelation more of an identity compared to Birthright and Conquest. Conquest's story may not be all that great or even good, but I would say it has the second best gameplay, thanks to relying on cleverly using the Dragon Veins to put you at more of an advantage. And while the difficulty could be tough, unlike Radiant Dawn where I breathed a sigh of relief after finishing a chapter, I actually felt accomplished doing Conquest. There were some chapters that straight up angered me at points, but not on the same levels that most of the stages Radiant Dawn had. Despite being the first of the Fates games I played, I surprisingly found Birthright to be the least fulfilling of the 3. It was a bit harder than Awakening for sure, and some of the late game chapters have a shockingly high difficulty spike with enemies somehow landing a couple of devastating strikes, even when their hit rate's supposed to be low. But this story path wasn't the most exciting or original, and the objectives were all the same, rooting the enemy types. Conquest and Revelation have these too, but they spread them out with more varied objectives like defending a base or seizing territory similar to previous entries, which again makes me prefer those games over Birthright because it's not the same thing over and over again. Yes, Birthright is the most accessible of the Fates games, but it's also the safest of the Fates games. There's not much here that you haven't already seen in Awakening, and because of the longer length, it can be pretty draining too. No matter which of the games you pick though, much like moving from Blazing Blade to Sacred Stones, or to a lesser extent Path of Radiance to Radiant Dawn, playing the Fates games right after Awakening does invoke a lot of deja vu. Gameplay's very similar already, but the graphics and presentation don't look much different either, even borrowing some of the same sound effects from Awakening. There are a couple of subtle improvements, like more shading in the menus and the character models actually having feet this time, but if you played Awakening before this, which you probably have, then you may get a bit visually burnt out by Fates' look and feel. Casual mode returns from Awakening as well if the difficulty proves to be too much, but if that somehow wasn't enough to make you comfortable, there's the new Phoenix mode where fallen allies come back to life with full health by your next turn. Okay, whether or not you like casual mode, at least you could argue that there's still some sort of challenge for players who aren't very good at tactical RPGs, because if a unit dies, they'll be taken out for the rest of the chapter and come back in the next one. The fewer units you have in the map, the more difficult it'll be to take care of the enemies. I can get by that. This is the game essentially playing itself, especially if you're turning on auto-battling, which also makes a comeback from older games. Don't play Fates on Phoenix mode, actually put some effort into your strategies. The only time I think I could accept this is with Conquest or maybe certain chapters in Revelation if you just want to get to the end. But if you have to turn it on for Birthright, then I feel sorry for you. And for the record, I'm not the best of these games either. So if I'm telling you to get good scrub, that's saying something. You're perfectly capable of prepping yourself for what's up ahead with the new My Castle system between stages. Though honestly, it's just a slightly condensed version of the world map from Sacred Stones and Awakening. Now I'm not talking so much about accessing new levels and paralogs, which is all done through simple menus. My Castle is your own little town you can wander around in, expanding it by spending dragon points, I don't know what these are, that you earn after completing chapters, paralogs, and skirmishes. You can place a lot of things in your castle like stores and blacksmiths to better equip your units, a prison to hold captured enemies and have them fight by your side, which I personally never found a use for because I'm too busy leveling up the permanent units. Statues of well-performed units can be put in as well for smaller boosts, totally blocking everyone's path because there's so many of the damn things that I can't be bothered finding special spots for all of them. An arena can be bought for 2 random units to fight against 2 random enemies for materials that can either be used for cooking temporary stat buffs for the next mission, or for purchasing bits of clothing that can also alter a unit's stats when wearing them. There's fruit and vegetable gardens to grow, some of the food you can give to your pet dragon, Lilith, to level up for skirmishes inside the castle, though I never saw her engage in battle once. Or if you're craving for some fan service, there's the hot springs with both guys and gals in their swimsuits that doesn't really do anything. Not sure why this was added aside from the fan service. If you want even more fan service, Corrin is also able to spend time with other characters to improve their affinity points needed to rank up their support, or go one step closer with their waifu or husbando by poking their faces to wake them up, or cool them down after having a hot bath by blowing into the 3DS's microphone. Okay, that's a bit weird. Corrin's partner has this heart meter too that I have no idea if it actually does anything. I got it to max, but nothing had changed as far as I could tell. What was the point of doing that? All of the stuff in my castle can be upgraded later with more dragon points and give you more benefits like stronger weapons in the armories, and again in concept, my castle is a neat little idea and could be a decent replacement for the world map. But as for this game, it's rather shallow. It only takes a few minutes to check everything before moving on to the next mission or skirmish, but it's a lot of menial stuff that doesn't make the experience much better, it's just kinda there. And the time does build up since you'll be in so many missions. You could always just not do the stuff that's available, but you'll constantly be reminded on the map screen, hey, you can do this thing now, when are you gonna do it? Oh, not yet? Okay, I'll just leave this exclamation point until you do it. Ugh, man, sometimes those can be helpful, but other times they can be a nuisance. Like the notifications in Kingdom Hearts games. My castle was originally created to get to know the characters outside of battle, but we've already got supports for that. And all we get from your friends inside the castle is flavor text, or a birthday message that I got back when I recorded this in April 2021. My castle's a decent enough idea, but it needed a little more going for it than what we currently have. 3 Houses would later do something similar with its academy and improve a number of aspects from my castle, but as for Fates' iteration, it leaves a lot to be desired. There is one cool thing about it though, where if you scan some Fire Emblem amiibos in the castle, you can actually recruit those characters to your squad like Marth, Ike, Robin, Lucina, and so on. The only minor setback is that they don't have their own support conversations, which is a slightly missed opportunity. I think that would have gone the extra mile with them. The support system at least works just as well as it did in Awakening, including bringing back child units if 2 characters get an S rank and marry each other. There's no time travel in Fates, however, so the kids instead get put into this other world where time moves much faster and the kids grow older very quickly, but the parents still somehow make time for their children and teach them how to fight, while they also focus on their general studies? I don't get how this works, and it's such a lame excuse to bring the child units back anyway, despite how great they were in Awakening. Not to say that they still don't kick ass in Fates, far from it. They can be just as powerful as they were last time. Selkie and Karagi, the daughter of Kaden and the son of Takumi, were my star players out of all 3 games, practically unstoppable by the time I made them boyfriend and girlfriend on top of that. It's just that the reasoning behind where these child units came from feels very forced for the sake of gameplay, unlike in Awakening where the time travel was woven into the story. But whatever, they're still awesome to use, so long as I'm not shipping Corrin with any of their siblings. Oh yeah, you can do that. So before I go into more detail, I will give Fates credit that unlike Awakening, they actually included a couple of same-sex romance options here, that being Niles for male Corrin and Rajat for female Corrin. It's a shame there's only 2 options, but I get that we can't have presumably heterosexual people suddenly become homosexual on a whim because I want them to be. That's not how humans work, and maybe intelligent systems saw it that way too. But all of those merits completely disappear when you see that Corrin is able to marry and have children with their brothers and sisters, blood related or not.
Damn it.
What the fuck is wrong with you, game? That is disgusting. I mean, Corrin marrying the grown-up kids is pretty sick already, some of them also being part of your family, like say their nephew Karagi. And remember Rajat? She's one of the child units. Great, the only other bisexual option apart from Niles, and she's supposed to be much younger than Corrin. Fantastic, we have incest and pedophilia. There's apparently some comments as well about Leo's son Forrest that could be considered transphobic, but I couldn't tell you where they were. I've never unlocked Forrest for my army. But as far as I knew, even though he doesn't identify as a woman, he still dresses like one. So with a game that already allows you to marry and sleep with family members, and run into your sister's fun bags for good measure, I can totally buy that they'd be against transgender people too. Now, Awakening did allow Robin to marry some of the children that travel back in time, which yes was pretty gross there too, but at least the characters were around the appropriate age despite being from different points in time and not just children with sped up growth spurts. It still wasn't great, but whatever, age is only a number and all that. And it also helped that none of Robin's romance options were blood relatives. Fates does try to excuse it using story reasons regarding Corrin's true lineage, but it doesn't matter because it's still revolting knowing that you're making out and having sex with someone who you consider family. This is just all amounts of wrong. And thank God Fates is the only Fire Emblem game that has such awful, awful imagery. Not to mention, the support conversations in general, no matter the character, aren't really as good as Awakening's in my opinion. Doesn't help for starters that many of the characters are just recycled from the last game, looking almost identical to their counterparts and having anagrams to their names, like Caldori being exactly the same as Cordelia, Rajat being the same as Tharja, and Odin being the same as Owain. Clever callback or just laziness? My money's on the latter. The support conversations in Awakening could be pretty straightforward with its subject matter and be more comedic than other Fire Emblem support conversations, but a number of them were usually related to personal struggles that the characters went through. Struggles like Noe missing her parents and worrying about losing her friends because they wouldn't live as long as her, or Cynthia not wanting to think about her sister Lucina falling in battle and having the responsibilities fall on her when she'd rather Lucina just stay alive. I remember plenty of conversations like that, but I can't recall a lot of Fates because for the most part there's just a minor inconvenience involved, such as Niles needing to be more formal in front of Elise, and there's very few that go a bit deeper and expand upon the characters. Even the new A+ ranks where two of your units can become besties, you don't get any conversations for those. Why? That's whole new territory you could explore there, and you're just not gonna do anything with it? I can't speak for all of the support conversations because I haven't seen every single one, but one that immediately springs to mind with me that actually did it right was with Kuragi and his mother Aboro. I don't know if it's the same conversation no matter who the mother is, but it's basically about how Kuragi loves hunting and wants to do nothing but Aboro says that he should be focusing on his studying too, which being a kid, or at least I assume he's a kid, he highly resents doing because studying's for nerds. Then during the next conversation, he runs into Aboro setting up his lessons in a way that he can understand, like any good mother would do, making the questions about hunting. Kuragi starts to feel bad about how much time Aboro puts into helping him study while he's out hunting all day, so he wants to partake in the lessons Aboro set out for him. And lo and behold, Kuragi's finding the topics easier to grasp, now wanting to spend more time studying with his mother than hunting, despite Aboro telling him he can do both as long as he strikes a balance. That's really nice, I like that a lot, and I really wish there were more conversations that are just as heartwarming and memorable, but unfortunately they're very few and far between, and that's a bit disappointing.
Even when taking away all of that and just looking at the gameplay and story, Fates just doesn't feel as grand as Awakening did, or arguably some of the previous entries, especially Path of Radiance and tackling racism. As I've said throughout this video, the idea of choosing who you consider your true family is a very interesting topic to discuss and has a lot of promise, but Intelligent Systems sorta missed the mark on this one, even though the gameplay is still very fun.
It really does all come down to splitting the narrative into 3 games, which I simply don't feel was all that necessary. I think they could have done something similar to Sacred Stones, where even though the length of the game was shorter than others in the series, it did its job and got out. And if we wanted more, we could switch to the other protagonists and get their side of the story, encouraging replayability. Fates was perhaps a little too ambitious for its own good. It has the best intentions of trying to appeal to different audiences for each game, but feels rather jumbled and bloated when playing all of them at once, which I imagine many Fire Emblem fans will want to do to experience everything. Fates Revelation was my personal favorite for spicing things up with new gimmicks for each level and feeling the most climactic, but it absolutely sucks that it's gonna go away soon once the 3DS eShop closes, and that you have to buy Birthright or Conquest first to even play Revelation. Birthright and Conquest are fine enough games to play too, but all of the Fates titles can be pretty exhausting to go through, especially if you're playing them right after finishing Awakening. Let some time pass before coming to Fates. It's more of the same as Awakening, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, but do try them out when you have the chance. They are worth your time, they're just not as good as they could be, and there are some questionable choices that I wish I could get into Intelligent Systems' heads about.
Well, SMT5, you had a good run of 2 months maintaining your title as the longest video I've ever done, but now you've just been beaten by Fire Emblem Fates. Thank God that's over. Oh, only a few more games left, only a few more games left. So if you're actually still here after an hour of me talking, then thank you very much for sticking to the end, and next time we're doing another Fire Emblem game for the 3DS, but luckily it's the last title for the 3DS, Shadows of Valentia. Just the one game this time, but there's still a lot to talk about. I do, however, have 13 Sentinels to go through first, as I received a review code for that, so please bear with me for that, and immediately afterwards we will talk about Fire Emblem Echoes. We're at least nearing the end of the marathon, finally, and hopefully no more Fire Emblem games will be released for a while. What's that? There's another Fire Emblem Warriors game coming soon? As opposed to the crossover spin-off that's either loved or hated. So, damn it. Gathering a large crowd of new people to the series. Damn it. So where do we go from here after successfully saving the Fire Emblem series from death as opposed to the crossover spin-off that ever... Well, we're back, ladies and gentlemen, with... as opposed to the... back in 2013 was...